Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about how to get great tones from a tube screamer. Tube Screamer, one of the most famous, if not the most famous, overdrive of all time. You've just heard the TS9, which out of the run of the standard tube screamers that are out there is probably my favorite. Today you are going to be listening to the TS9 as well as the classic TS808 and a Maxon TS808. We're going to hear all those three pedals and what they can do, a little bit of what their differences are. And what I want to do is talk about some of the basic rules on how to get great tones out of these pedals, because some people love them, some people love to hate them. They are not a transparent overdrive. They have a sound, and part of that leads to some of the reasons why people love and hate them. There is the infamous mid-hump of a tube screamer, as well as a little bit of compression, kind of a top-end roll-off, and it shapes your tone. If you're going through a tube screamer, it's got a tone and you have to like that tone. But there are also a lot of players who don't seem to use them quite right and don't know exactly how to get the best tones out of them. So that's what we're doing today. Now, I do want to mention that these are all stock pedals. These are the same ones that you would find in the store. The only exception being the Maxon, which is a little bit older, and there is one mod to it. As you can see, one of the knobs is held in by a screw, which I just absolutely love, because that is the best combination of cheap musician hack, as well as being from Maine, which is where I got the pedal. It's also a great Maine hack. Oh yeah, oh geez, knob's popping off. Well, ain't gonna spend $3.50 on a new one. Just jam a screw in there, she'll be good as new. So that's what you're listening to today. Now, for starters, I want to mention, kind of go back on what I just said. Now, the tube screamer does have a top-end roll-off. It is when you look at a frequency spectrum, it's pretty high up there, because tube screamers are still surprisingly bright in my experience. And you'll notice that on the pedals in this video, I have the tone rolled back quite a bit. So my first point on using a tube screamer would be to start with the tone rolled back and just bring it up to where you need it, as opposed to starting with knobs at noon, which is kind of the classic. They can be surprisingly bright and really a little too much so, particularly if it's the only thing in your rig. Now, this can depend on your rig and can depend on your guitar, but I've always found that I get the best tube screamer tones with the tone knob back behind noon. In fact, frequently I've had it as low as 10 o'clock, like you're hearing in some of this video. Now, keep in mind that I am playing solo in this video, no other instruments around me, and that can lead to turning the tone back a little bit more. But even in a band setting, the TS9, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a second, I used that the first time that I played on TV. That's kind of a special pedal for me. Playing into a Super Reverb, just that pedal, and I was surprised how bright it was when we did sound check, and so I turned the tone way back, and that was where it really smoothed out and sounded great. The TS9 for me is kind of like home cooking. It's comfort food to a certain extent. That pedal has the great honor of being my backup pedal. I know that sounds kind of like a weird thing to say. That's the pedal that I bring with me loaded with a fresh 9 volt in case something goes wrong, because it's old, reliable. You know, I've worked with a lot of great pedal companies doing a lot of great demos, and I tend to favor those for my pedal boards, but a good old TS9 is kind of the one that I always want to have with me as a backup, just in case I need it. Now, I want to get into how to get the most out of these pedals. The first thing that I will say is the Tube Screamer is very dynamic, so use your guitar's volume. I actually like to think of a Tube Screamer as kind of like a fuzz face in a way. Not tonally, but in the way that you use it. I like to have it set so that it gives me a good amount of drive, but then when you roll your volume back, it gives you this really nice clean tone that's different than your standard clean tone. See, one of the things about a Tube Screamer is that with the mid hump, it really lifts and pushes your signal forward, and that can be great for live setting, particularly with a clean tone. The reason is because clean tones on a tube amp in a full band setting, a lot of times with the other instruments around you sort of lose the nuance, and all you can hear is that sort of top end bite, which can make it actually sound thin. Well, with a Tube Screamer on with the mid hump, it really sort of fills in that tone in a way that you can hear it. It sort of adjusts the frequency spectrum a little bit in a way that you can hear it, and it sounds great, and your tone sounds a little bigger, a little more present, without being boomy or without being too, you know, not too much bottom end. It just makes it sound nicer and more present and sweeter. So we're going to stay on the Telecaster now, and we're going to play with a Tube Screamer and turn the volume down on the guitar a little bit and go back and forth so that you can really hear how you can use it for some nice kind of drive swells and just sweeten up your clean tone with your guitar's volume rolled back. All right, now we're going to go into a series of tones that are all based on one principle of the Tube Screamer, which is important to know. The Tube Screamer is a social overdrive. All right, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that many of the classic Tube Screamer tones that you will hear involve some other thing providing gain, whether it's the amplifier or stacking it with another pedal, including stacking it with another Tube Screamer, and bonus points to those of you who know who was the famous player who stacked multiple Tube Screamers. Go ahead and put that in the comments if you know who it was. Many classic Tube Screamer tones, and I mean honestly, just overdrive, fuzz tones, whatever, even distortion tones in general, come from boosting an already overdriven amplifier using the pedal. The Tube Screamer is no exception to that. So we're going to do a whole gamut here on ways that you can kind of boost it and use it. And for a lot of this, I'm going to have the overdrive knob, the drive knob on the Tube Screamers, turned all the way off. So we're going to start with a Les Paul. Now today I'm using a Supro Delta King 12. The reason I'm using that amp is because it gives me a lot of variation in the amp itself. It has both a boost and a drive knob, which gives me flexibility to give you different tones to run the Tube Screamer out. So we're going to use a Les Paul with both the drive and the boost engaged. Now that gives me a pretty distorted tone from the amp. And then I'm going to boost it with the Tube Screamer, and what you're going to hear it does is really cool. The mid hump and that slight bit of top end roll off and compression warms it up, kind of glues it together, and again lifts the signal and kind of pushes it forward and just makes it sweeter, more present, and a really nice tone. So let's check that out. next, I'm going to switch the drive off on the Supro. So now I'm just using the boost, which is an FET boost. So it's going to be kind of an old-fashioned bluesy crunch. And for this, I'm going to use a Stratocaster. Now I'm kind of boost it so you can hear what a classic sort of bluesy tone you get from boosting it. Now this for me is reminiscent of one of my favorite times I've ever used a tube screamer. I got to sit in with a blues band in Chicago 7 years ago or so, and I didn't have my rig with me. I was just sitting in, so I used the other rig that was there. It was a Telecaster into an amp that I didn't recognize, and then a TS9. And I was playing clean. We were playing Stormy Monday, I remember. And when it got time for my lead, I kicked on the tube screamer, and it was just like this power boost. Again, it just lifted it. Everything felt powerful and rich and present, and I just absolutely loved it. It just has always stood out in my mind as kind of like, that's what a tube screamer is. That's what a tube screamer does, is it just sort of gives you more of this, you know? So what you're going to hear is with the amp boosted for kind of a nice old-fashioned crunch, then with a tube screamer, lifts the signal, glues it together, pushes it forward, sweetens it up, makes it really nice. Let's check this out. All right, now we're going to go back to the amplifier totally clean. So the boost and the drive are off. I'm going to stick with the Stratocaster here. Now I'm going to stack tube screamers, but I'm going to do it one at a time. I'm going to start with the 808 with the overdrive all the way off. And what you'll hear there is it's kind of like what I was doing with the Telecaster earlier, rolling the volume off, but just as your standard tone with the volume all the way up. There's this really sweet top end clarity with that mid hump again that sort of pushes your signal forward, sweetens it up, fattens it up, but not in a boomy way. And then I'm going to stack it into the TS9. Now with that, I have the overdrive pushed up a little bit to really give you a bit of a boost. And you'll hear it just really becomes this smooth sustain that works beautifully together and gives you some of these nice classic bluesy tones. So let's have a listen to that. Right now, I want to get up to the #1 rule on how to get the best tones out of a tube screamer. This is the absolute most important thing. If you take anything away from this video, take this. Your tube screamer must be at least at unity gain, preferably higher. A tube screamer wants to push an amplifier. I don't care what tube screamer it is. I don't care if it's a TS9 that you buy at the store or if it's some fancy hand-wired thing from a boutique company. A tube screamer wants to push your amp. If you have the volume set lower than your amp so that when you kick it on, you're actually losing a little bit, that's when it starts to sound like a cheap toy, and it just does not work. It needs to, even if it's not much, I mean, it doesn't need to, like, you know, send you off into the stratosphere with volume. even if it's just a little bit, a tube screamer just wants to push your amp. That's kind of the whole point of it. It lifts your signal, it punches it forward. So you're gonna get the most out of it, whether you have the drive all the way off or all the way up or anything in between. You are gonna get the best tones from this pedal if you're boosting your amp with it, as opposed to keeping it, you know, just dropping it a little bit. Now, that's what I have for you all with the Tube Screamer today, but mine is obviously not the only opinion that matters, so please let us know in the comments. Let us know, what Tube Screamer do you use? What amplifier and guitar do you use it with? What's your rig? Are there other ways that you use it that I didn't cover in this video? Also, let us know, what other pedals do you like to stack it with? I'm focused on Tube Screamers today, so I was stacking those two together, but they also work really well with other pedals, whether it's a blues breaker or a clone or what have you. So let us know if there's another pedal that you love to stack it with. I'm Jack Fossett. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.